White House correspondent, Rita Braver.
Welcome to the broadcast. With us now, Senator Dianne Feinstein from California, home to 52% of the country's illegal immigrants. Dan Stein, who thinks there should be a moratorium on legal immigration, and Michael Ratner, who argues that immigration is good for our country's economy. Let's start with you, Senator. Your governor says that he might consider suing the federal government because he says California is being forced to pay for some $3 billion a year for taking care of health care, for criminal justice, and for all kinds of things for illegal immigrants. Would you support such a suit? And just how do you think that illegal immigration is hurting your state?
Well, I think governors are going to sue. I doubt very much whether the suits are going to be upheld in court. The problem for the federal government is that this is one of the biggest unfunded mandates. Border control is a federal responsibility. We simply don't enforce our borders adequately. In my state, you have about 2,000 people a day illegally who cross the border. Now, this adds up to about 2 million people who compete for housing, who compete for classroom space. We've had a Medicaid situation where in 1988 there were about 3,000 people on Medicaid. There are well over 300,000 today who are illegal aliens. That presents obvious problems. Now, and my position has been we need to enforce our borders. We can do it. We need to streamline the asylum process and return it to what it should be, rather than a sort of a broad political category. Now, and I think those two things would help dramatically.
What about that? Are you being irresponsible, and are you in fact scapegoating immigrants for your state's other problems?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, my mother was an immigrant to this nation and a naturalized citizen later in her life. No, I think the fabric of this nation is one of a newcomer nation. Having said that, and one of the problems is, and Mr. Ratner just got into that kind of name-calling debate, which polarizes the issue, and so you can't come together. You've got essentially 7 states that are mainly affected by illegal immigrants and immigration in this country. If the 7 states could sit down and work out a policy of how to handle this, we could do some practical legislation that would make sense. But when you get into that kind of incendiary rhetoric that he is now practicing, it presents a very real problem, because anytime you try to do anything except say it's all lovely, you're un-American or you're scapegoating. And it is my belief that the way you protect the front door of legal immigration is to close the back door of illegal immigrants, which you can't control and you can't well provide for.
Well, we have had so many examples of stories of illegal immigrants coming across the border to give birth to their children, allowing their children to then become American citizens. Some people in Congress are beginning to talk about a constitutional amendment that would do something that would really change the way America has been forever, and that is to make a change and not to allow those born in this country to have automatic citizenship. It sounds like it would be very revolutionary for this question, because the governor of her state is one of the people who is backing this idea of a constitutional amendment, as I understand it. What's your position on it?
Yep, my position is I do not agree that one should take away the constitutional right of when you're born in this country, you're a citizen. That's what makes America special. But I'll tell you, things like that are going to be seriously considered if the atmosphere is so incendiary that we can't sit down and work out a solution to the problem. And that's one of the problems. You have people in the Congress from small states who don't have immigration problems, making policy, and it very often does not work. I think we can enforce our borders. I think we should enforce our borders. To have a situation where 40% of the babies born on Medicaid in California today are born of illegal immigrants creates a very real problem for the state, which is in deficit.
Look, of course you can enforce the borders.
Let me finish.
I agree.
To have 17% of our prison population at a cost of $300 million a year be illegal immigrants who come here and commit felonies. That's not what this nation is all about.
Of course we can enforce the...
Move on very quickly to another issue. Many of your colleagues in Congress and even the Clinton administration are talking about limiting benefits to legal immigrants in this country, saying that welfare that has traditionally been allowed to legal immigrants should be cut because we just don't have enough money for that. What's your opinion on that?
Well, my opinion on it is that we ought to concentrate our efforts as a first step on the issue of illegal immigration and asylum reform. One thing you can hear from this discussion, nothing is going to be solved by people yelling at each other. The only way you're going to solve it is to let people who have the problem. You know, one of the things that I resent is that you got people in New York telling California what California should be doing when it's got a deficit of $10 billion. And I think that's the kind of government that's very upsetting to people. There are certain basic rights. We should keep those rights. But if we don't control the flood of illegal immigrants into this country, we will have, I believe, such a backlash as people who are citizens find they can't find jobs, they can't get health care. It creates an enormous problem.
Now,
the time has come for us to sit down and work out some practical solutions. And they can be worked out. That's the irony.
You've talked about more border guards. You've also talked about charging people $1 every time they cross the border. Is that a good idea?
Tell you, that's the silliest thing I ever heard. Why should someone who just goes to Mexico have to pay $1 extra to support California's so-called problems with immigration?